Hello and welcome to Technically Speaking, a podcast where scientists and engineers come together to chat about a common interest, share knowledge and satisfy some curiosity. I'm Anika, and in this episode, I'm joined by Ruwaida, Laura and Cara to talk about concrete and offer our points of view on its use as a building material. So, to start off with, Laura, why do you care about concrete?
Well, it's actually quite a complicated material. It's got lots of different things going on in it. So you've got all these really kind of slow chemical processes that over time add up to some really big changes, which I find quite interesting.
Definitely is interesting. What about you, Cara? What are your thoughts on concrete?
Well, I guess I studied civil engineering and I found concrete incredibly boring. I have to be honest. At the time that I was studying civil engineering, it was the part of engineering I just didn't find interesting at all from the engineering perspective of trying to figure out how it works and why. But actually, the more I kind of learned about building materials and why we use them and what the reasons are behind them and kind of like the kind of personal stories that really go into stuff, that's when I started to find actually concrete quite a bit interesting.
I like that. I've never heard of someone talking about the personal stories that related to concrete, and I think that's such a nice thing to think about because we don't often think there is personality behind these buildings. Someone's put all that effort making them.
Yeah, you don't. I think there's like a lot of it around the world, but I'm Irish by background. What we did was we emigrated around the world and built stuff. So there's probably a lot of Irish stories within concrete. Well, within the lane of concrete, not in the engineering behind it.
Definitely. And there's a lot of Irish pubs in any country in the world.
Yeah.
So maybe they were built by concrete as well.
Yeah, exactly.
What about you, Ruwaida? What are your thoughts?
I started dealing with concrete in my undergrad as a civil engineer. I didn't like it much then. It was like reinforced concrete design was really good to me. It was kind of complicated for an undergrad at the time. Then I ended up doing a PhD in concrete and fire, where I found concrete really interesting. It's also like it's the way that concrete could form into any shape, which make the building really look nice if you want it to be. And that's why I really find the concrete to be a fascinating material.
Did you say your PhD was setting concrete on fire?
Yes. So it's basically concrete have a good reputation for being a good resisting for a fire scenario. However, after 500 degrees centigrade, it will start to degrade and have all this weird behavior because the moisture will go out of the concrete. And that's when it becomes a bit dangerous and not as stable as we think it would be. And any kind of deformation to the concrete would be irreversible in case of a fire. So that's why I started to find it more interesting.
Definitely super, super interesting. There's so much for us to all learn. So as you probably guessed, we do have a concrete expert with us, Ruwaida. So now we've got some kind of idea of why concrete is interesting to all of us. Ruwaida, can you tell us a bit about how you make it?
So basically, concrete is not a one material. It's a mixture of a few stuff. So is aggregate, which is gravel and sand, and cement and water. And cement do act like the glue in the concrete. So it's the glue that bring everything together. An interesting fact about the cement itself, it was made in the UK in Leeds by someone called Joseph Aston, and it's called Portland cement. And also there's another funny story about the name Portland cement. Anyone want to say why it's called Portland cement?
It's from a place called Portland, maybe? I don't know.
Roughly, so there is like the shore and it's Portland, huge rock in there, and it's gray, and cement is gray. And when they were promoting cement, they said is as strong as the Portland rocks. Also, like because you mix few materials to make the concrete, that make it kind of inhomogeneous. And making the cement itself is basically you need to get some rocks that contain silica and calcium, burn these rocks, and then you'll get the cement. It's interesting when you make the concrete, you'll add the water back to your cement to make it harden again. Quite interesting, isn't it?
Very interesting. I've always used cement and concrete interchangeably as two words. I don't know if that's maybe because I'm not from a civil engineering background, but I always do that. But so that's incorrect.
So basically, cement is the powder. If you mix the cement only with water, that would be a grout.
Okay.
Or a cement paste. If you add sand to it, and that's when you use it to glue masonry units together, bricks, that called mortar.
Mm-hmm.
And concrete is actually when you add in the aggregate, which would lead
as a
you
civil
to
engineer, I didn't know that.
I'm glad to realize that.
Yeah, it's interesting how many civil engineers graduate without knowing that because no one indicated to them. And I keep saying that all the time. It's like there's 2-3 different types of things in concrete, which brings me to another point. There is reinforced concrete and there is normal concrete. So normal concrete is not really good in tension. So basically when you try to bend it, it snaps. So we add steel in the tension bit, and that will become reinforced concrete. So there is concrete, there's reinforced concrete as well, which is a different animal.
I think that's really interesting as well, because actually, well, living in the UK anyway, we see with grout, mortar, and concrete all the time in the buildings all around us, and people probably refer to them as different names. So, like in your everyday life, it's quite interesting just to know that they have correct names for those things.
Yeah, learn the differences between them, and like, because we just think they're either all the same, but they have quite a few differences. So that's really interesting. So we've talked a bit about how concrete is made. Can you discuss a bit about the impact on the environment, like this manufacturing process of concrete? How does that impact the climate?
There are 2 things would impact the environment. Is the manufacturing bit. When you try to produce concrete, as I said, you get rock, you burn them, CO2. And the other bit is the reaction itself for the cement to be going back to its hardened status when it's used as the glue. And that would release CO2 as well. So it's like 2 things contribute to that. The carbon footprint coming from the concrete is about 200 grams per kilo.
Oh, wow.
However, it's much less than the footprint for steel. So the steel will have 5 times higher footprint than concrete.
Yeah, definitely something we have to consider a lot more these days, when we're talking about climate change and all of these issues. But nevertheless, concrete definitely has its uses. As we've mentioned, we see it all over the place, all around the world. So I'd like to ask 2 of our non-concrete specialists, Laura and Cara, if you were to build your dream house, what would you want to know about concrete?
So my dream house, so I live near Lake District National Park in the UK, which is very pretty. It's also very wet. So I'd want something that would be sort of protective from the damp, and probably quite warm, which I think from what I can tell seems like it would have to be kind of like at least partially underground to retain the heat. So how would I go about creating sort of like almost like I want to say a concrete bunker, but that sounds really grim to live in.
COVID times, Laura. Do you know what I mean? Sounds reasonable having a concrete bunker, I'd say. But anyway,
Yeah.
sorry.
It would have like carved out into the hillside, so you could have some views across the mountains. But
Classic bunker style. How else would you have a bunker unless it was carved up into a mountain?
Bunker with a view, yeah.
Well, interesting, like, because you could use the concrete in your frame. So the frame of the building, and you could shape that in any way, because you could cast the concrete, because we always try to make the concrete workable, so it would be easily poured into a different shape. So you could use the concrete as the frame of your house, which also you could, if you are worried on the environment, you could use some of the admixture like fly ash to reduce how much cement you'll have in it. And pouring your frame of your bunker from concrete would be very good. Also, you could use the masonry bricks for the isolating stuff, or you can, because like we didn't want to cast your walls out of concrete. You're not building a nuclear reactor there. So you would use masonry bricks, which have some concrete with where the motors come in as well. And it's also like shapes like that. It could be shaped in any way you would like. However, like having the structure, the main structure from casted concrete would be fine. So that would be my idea on this one.
Okay. So if I wanted to keep it like really insulating, is there anything particular I'd have to do to it to make it like sort of retain the heat in the winter?
It would retain the heat anyway in the winter. So because concrete thermal conductivity is really low. And that is one of the advantages of having a building with concrete is this thermal conductivity is really low. So let's say if you cast the slab, which is the roof or the flooring between your floors from concrete, the heat won't travel in between the two stories as much as from another material, let's say like timber or something else, because it have a very low thermal conductivity, so it will help your insulation. However, I would not recommend casting walls of concrete because it would look hideous.
So if I had like a concrete floor and a concrete ceiling, and then like maybe some walls that were covered in something else, like part of the mountainside.
Masonry.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that's what I would assume, like having the walls to be built with masonry bricks. There is something I would not recommend using very much to reduce its impact on the environment, but if you need, there is concrete blocks, and they could act like a masonry unit. So they would cast them into masonry shape and they build with them, and they would really help with insulation because they cast in a way that they're from concrete and they have a gap in the middle that would reduce the will increase the thermal insulation, really, not reduce it.
Okay. And I know that there are some quite slow chemical processes that go on in concrete that I think, does it normally have like a design life of about 50 years?
Yes and no. So basically they assume the design life of the concrete span is 50 years because they would think it's not as durable. However you need to design it. It depends on where you place your structure. So if you're on a marine structure, you would want to regularly maintain that because the concrete will be directly affected by salt water, where salt will attack the concrete and degrade the bond between its material, and that's where it would become kind of dangerous. Also, like a bridge case could be another example for that. So, because concrete is very susceptible to the weather, however, is very durable. So the strength could decrease. I wouldn't worry if I'm building a house with concrete to have a span of 50 years. It would definitely have a higher span.
Cool. Oh, that's good to know. So it'll outlast me probably.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
So
it'll be fine.
all your bunker needs, concrete seems like a reasonable material. Cara, what about you? What would you want, in your dream house that maybe concrete could help fulfill?
I have to say, Verita, so yeah, okay, well, I've got some questions for you. First of all, you've done the job of convincing me that concrete is actually kind of interesting. I actually have loads of questions for you now in what you've just said. So I don't know, I kind of want to make a few points actually. So you're making me think about how you should build houses. The one you've just said is a concrete's really good for building because it doesn't transfer heat very easily. And this makes me wonder why there's so many countries building giant glass buildings if they should be using things like concrete instead that aren't transferring heat so easily, right? They're turning houses into greenhouses, whereas things like concrete might do a slightly better job. And then you said, so that wasn't what I was thinking originally. What I actually was going to ask was that my dream house was always going to be the opposite of whatever concrete could be, because in Ireland, they have really weird planning rules for decades in the Republic of Ireland, where there's something called, I think it's called like development blight, where you could basically build a house wherever you wanted if you had land, and everyone built it from these concrete blocks you've just spoken about. We call them breeze blocks, and they leave them just looking like concrete squares, and they're so unattractive. They don't even paint them. They just look so terrible. And I always hated concrete because of that. I was like, it just looks absolutely dreadful. Why would you want to build a house like that? But so thankfully I've kind of got over that a little bit, and I've come to really appreciate things like brutalism. We can actually have some kind of, like the Brennell building, right, is a great example of a concrete building, which maybe was ugly for a while, but we kind of can appreciate it again. Or the Preston bus station, which is like one of the best examples of like brutalism in the Northwest, people say. So I kind of come around it now. So for me, the things I would consider is if I'm weighing up how to build a dream house, it's between how does it look aesthetically, what's the environmental impact of it going to be, but also what's the cost, how easy is it to build with concrete? And you kind of answered a lot of that already. You've kind of said concrete does a lot of the job of, you can make it, you can form it how you want, so it looks quite nice. It does things quite well with concrete. We know how to do it quite easily. So maybe is the environmental impact the biggest thing here? So what is it we really need to balance out when we're thinking about the environmental impact of concrete?
So first thing, if you're worried about the environment, there is few stuff that happening with concrete industry at the moment. So some people will use the recycled aggregate. So when they demolish the building, they'll crush the concrete back to aggregate and reuse it. So you could use a recycled aggregate for your concrete, or some people will call that reclaimed aggregate. The other thing that you would also could use is using some of the admixture, because you're building a house, you don't need a very high resistant. You're not building a skyscraper, so you could use the admixture like fly ash or volcanic ash that would reduce the amount of cement in the concrete mix that you're using. The other possibility is lots of people using lightweight concrete now, and they would use shredded tires in the concrete, which make it light in weight and still have a good resistance. So you could use you could put in lots of stuff in your concrete that make it more environmentally friendly and reduce the impact of producing the concrete to the environment as well.
So there aren't that many volcanoes around here.
We can import.
We could, but would that not then like push up the CO2 emissions again, because you're transferring stuff further than you necessarily have to?
Well, there's a fly ash coming from the steel industry.
But I would argue there could be one thing we could use, which people say is very environmentally friendly, which is hemp. You can have hempcrete, right? And so hemp is there's political arguments about why you should or shouldn't have hemp grown in different places. And at the minute, you can't farm hemp on a large scale, I don't think, that easily within the UK or within Europe. But apparently hemp is a great thing that you can put into concrete, and it's a very sustainable source of plant material that can be used within concrete.
I haven't heard this.
It grows wild all over the place as well, right? Like
yeah, it does.
I know in Pakistan it's like everywhere. It's just it's slightly different, but like it just grows. Like
yeah,
you can see it on.
I have to say I don't know the actual science behind how comparable that is to volcanic ash or to fly ash, but I know that it is an option at least for a different material. It's quite like horsehair. Rita, am I correct in thinking horsehair is one of the first things that they used to put into concrete?
Yeah, they put quite a lot of things, because basically that you add these to add the strength to extension, because the long strand will give you more resistant in the tension. So when you bend it, it won't snap at you. It would be a bit more ductile.
So it has to be longer. You can't have like offcuts from the hairdressers used to reinforce.
No.
That could be a good, but it has to be longer.
Yeah, there has to be long, and there has to be a certain length to have some impact on the material. Otherwise, it's just something there and would not work.
Fascinating. Okay, so I think we've discussed a lot about the dreams and potential things for the future, including hemp concrete. So why do we build with concrete? I think we've covered a lot of this, to be honest, but if we could summarize why we still use concrete and why we build with it.
Well, first, formable, so you can form it into any shape, durable, and is very economic and have low thermal conductivity. So that's why I would build with concrete. And basically, civil engineers are here to make building safer and more affordable. So concrete is a good choice.
Awesome. And I'd also like to ask our panelists what their favorite concrete buildings are. I know Kara's already mentioned Brutalism and some of the buildings in Manchester, but yeah, if everyone could say what their favorite concrete buildings are.
I don't have a favorite building as such, but I know that when you polish it and you bring out like all the shine, like so you take off the surface layer and you reveal all the aggregate inside and you sort of shine that up, it looks really, really impressive. You can build like work tops out of it for kitchens, and it looks so nice.
I never knew you could polish concrete. This is
Oh my God, you have to go.
Yeah,
It's so nice.
You
I work with
can.
metals, so this is blowing my mind right now that you can polish concrete. I'm just like, wow.
And you can polish anything.
Yeah, true.
That's true. That's true.
You can get polished concrete floors. I totally agree, Laura. Aesthetically, spot on.
Rueda, what about you? You clearly love concrete a lot.
Yes, actually, I have lots of favorite concrete structures, and I'll share two of them. One of them is a bridge. It's called the Clarkmanshire Bridge, which I found it very annoying to pronounce. However, it's a very fascinating bridge in Scotland made from pre-stressed concrete, which is similar to reinforced concrete, except for this time you will pre-stress your steel bar when you make your concrete to make it more resistant. So the span for the girder for this bridge is about 45 meter, which is a huge span. Also, the shape of the girder itself is shaped in a very nice way that would resist the dynamic impact of the wind and so on, and make it lightweight as well. Which could not be done without the concrete. So that's the first structure. The other structure is the V&A Museum in Dundee. And it's basically has the building made from concrete because the concrete is durable, and the building is just next to the Tay Bridge in Dundee. And it's one of the very famous building as well. And it have the main panel made of a structural glass as well in the middle, so it looks really nice. Also, like the facade of it made of these all precast concrete beam. I think when I read the report about it, it was around 6,000 beam made to used in the facade. They all had different dimension to make it look more modern. So that's my two favorite buildings I'm sharing with you.
Some beautiful structures there. I recommend everyone looks them up. So Cara, I know you mentioned the Reynolds building. Do you have any other fabulous concrete structures that stand out to you?
I think as someone who doesn't know concrete as well, I'm not a concrete expert, I think it's difficult to know actually sometimes what buildings are made from concrete, because sometimes it's internally being used to hold things up, but maybe on the outside it's glass instead, so you don't really know. So yeah, I have to say that I've struggled to pick just one building that I could really point at, but I do really enjoy Soviet architecture. I think generally it's after, with a bit of distance now, we kind of appreciate maybe the concrete has kind of come back into fashion again a little bit or something. I'm not sure, but yeah, I just really like aesthetically how the buildings look and how they manage to get artwork done directly into the concrete on the facades.
Yeah, there's some awesome, kind of this brutalist type architecture. Also, like in Berlin, I remember similar types of architecture, and it's beautiful. And I think that's a really good point about not knowing whether a building has concrete inside. Like now I'm thinking, does my house have concrete? Most likely it does, but I never thought of that because it's just like, I just see the bricks on the outside, and it's really cool to think that, yeah, there's all these buildings that have concrete and we wouldn't have even thought about it. Okay, so we've discussed about how concrete's been used in the past, how it's used in the present. Do you guys think that concrete's still going to be used in the future, or will we use something else?
So from my perspective, so first I want to comment on your house. So your house probably have mortar, not concrete in it, if it's built with the bricks. So let's go back to your
remember this
question.
from the beginning, mortar versus cement versus concrete. I have learned something in this podcast, I promise.
Yeah, so back to the future. Yes, we will still be building from concrete. However, we're trying to make the concrete more sustainable and more environmental friendly as well. The other material which is of use now is timber. There's like lots of fascinating building built out of timber. There is one of them is the Cube building in London, is 33 meter high, and the new thing in civil engineering is called hybrid steel timber buildings, which basically they mix the steel and timber in their building. And one example of that, which is just approved, is the South Warwick tube station building. So they will build a building with 17-story over that tube station in London. And I think it would be fascinating because both steel and timber could look really nice in a building.
Yeah, some awesome things to look forward to, and an unwitting reference to one of the best movies of all time, Back to the Future, at the beginning of that really segment. And yeah, love that movie. So also watch Back to the Future, guys. So we're coming towards the end now. So initially, although concrete might seem kind of boring, when you start talking to an expert and a group of interested people, as we have done today, it suddenly becomes really, really interesting. It seems quite a complex material that's challenging to make, but it's used in so many different applications because it's formable and it can make different shapes. However, it does have a bit of an impact on the climate, so that's something we're going to have to think about moving forward. So just to end, I want to ask our panel and our expert today if there's anything, like any messages they want to reinforce. Do you get it? Funny, and maybe not that funny. And then, yeah, you want to mention before we wrap up?
Yeah, we need some concrete messages there, aren't we?
Oh yeah, another great one. Love it.
Yeah, my response is definitely to very try not to use really terrible puns.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I've been told that before, so I will definitely take that moving forward.
Although it does make the conversation more interesting.
Well, I don't know. It's debatable, isn't it? We can ask our listeners. Please contact us we have a Twitter page now. I should have mentioned this before. What's our Twitter handle, Laura?
Oh, it's something like technically it's put 11. It's great, isn't it? But yeah, you can find us if you just search for Technically Speaking in Twitter and take a look for our podcast artwork. And
let us know if you want more puns. It can be arranged. But yeah, no. Are there any concrete things that people want to let people know before we finish?
I would just say, like, all the material we're using to build will have an impact on the environment. So we need to be reasonable when we build the stuff. And we would need to think about the impact of any material, not only the concrete, because it have two parts. It have the production of it and the use of it. And we need to be as environmental friendly when we're doing this.
So really being conscious of the life cycle of a whole project, yeah, as you say, going from the manufacturing to the usage, and hopefully using stuff as long as possible and trying to extend the life of things that we already have rather than building new things. A lot of the time we hear people want to demolish a lot of the buildings with this brutalist architecture, but is there a way we can repurpose them for something? That's something definitely to think about. Yeah, thank you very much. To Laura, Cara and Ruwaida. That was a fascinating conversation. I hope everyone who's listening learned as much about concrete as I have today as a complete novice. And yeah, please get in touch with us on our Twitter and hopefully we'll chat with you next time.
The views expressed in this podcast belong entirely to the person that said them. They do not represent any industry or organisation. If you enjoyed listening to these views, it would really help us out if you could rate us, leave a review and tell a friend. This podcast was sponsored by no one, but if you're interested in funding us to continue to have frank discussions about science and engineering, please get in touch.